Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome back to another Thirsty Thursday podcast. I hope everyone's having an awesome day, awesome week. Happy Thursday. In tonight's episode, we have an awesome guest named Joe. I'll let him introduce himself in a second. And yeah, obviously, as we always do it, like in the last 15 minutes, we'll do some Q&A. And then we have some rapid fire questions I have for Joe, which is a new thing I want to start trying. And yeah, Joe, so, who are you? What have you been up to? And thanks for joining tonight.
Yeah, no, thanks, Pat, for having me. So, my name's Joe Slowick. Currently, I'm running cybersecurity alerting strategy for Data Miner while also doing teaching and educational work through my own company, Paralysis, and teaching at cons and stuff like that. I've been in information security for a minute at this point. Coming up on 20 years, so it feels like forever now. Got my start in the Navy, went through some other government places after that, and then I've worked at a variety of companies, vendors, end users, similar, and kind of seen a lot of both sides for both like a provider perspective for security as well as a consumer or a internal applier of such things. So seen a bunch of stuff. Let's put it that way.
Nice, nice. And that's awesome, right? This is like a topic that a lot of my audience it may have or may not have experience with, like CTI, right? Cyber threat intel. So, you said you've been in the game for about 20 years. That's sick. That's awesome. So, how did you actually get started in like CTI and cyber investigations? Like, what piqued your interest with this field versus pen testing and all the other cool things? But like, why did you go down this alley?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question because when I left the military, I my first role was leading incident response for a national laboratory in the U.S., Los Alamos National Laboratory, and it was really there, between that experience and thinking about what I'd done while I was in the Navy and some other things, that I'd started thinking it's like, we kind of keep responding to the same crap over and over again. Like, why aren't we learning better? And why aren't we getting ahead of these sorts of adversaries or really figuring out what adversaries are doing, how they're operating instead of always just responding, reacting, and similar, which makes sense from an incident response role.
Hmm.
And, this is 2012, 2013. Things like CTI as a discipline was very much in its infancy. We're talking the APT1 report from Mandiant was just a year or two old at that point, which some regard as being like the foundational document for commercial cyber threat intelligence reporting. So it's not like there was like, I'm going to go to CTI school or something like that. Like it just didn't exist.
Hmm.
So really and that's why I tell folks, what started my interest in cyber threat intelligence or whatever you wanted to call it back then was more understanding threats and understanding what to do about them and then how to find them and evict them.
Mm.
So I look at my CTI experience like I was not an intelligence person when I was in the military. Those people are weird. Sorry, intel people. But
Totally.
I was always more of an ops guy, and I always have, ever since the beginning, going back, over 15 years at this point, or almost 15 years at this point now,
Mhm.
that threat intel is at its root decision support. How do I make someone SOC analyst, incident responder, threat hunter, detection engineer, what have you, do their job better?
Mhm.
And thinking about that instead of the esoteric, like, oh, APT Fozzie Bear likes using tool crazy widget against these people. It's like no one cares. Some people care. It's good for
Yeah.
conference talks, it's good for other things. But end of the day, we're about defending networks. And so it's figuring out what is it that we can do to try to push ourselves, maybe not ahead of adversaries because we can't predict the future, but
Mhm.
at least getting as close as we can to anticipating what adversaries will do to boost defense. And that's CTI at the end of the day in my mind.
Love it, love it, and that's super informative. I really appreciate you elaborating on that. That's education for myself as well. Like I said, this is not my forte, so I'm taking this conversation as an educational, informative conversation as well. So, speaking of, speaking of all those cool things, like, what was the first like real incident that made you like, oh man, this shit is real? You know what I mean? Like, because sometimes we're like, oh, Yeah, you go and I'll 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 go after. But yeah, like what was some first like real deal shit?
Yeah, I mean, from a perspective where I can both talk about things and others will understand them, and not to try to get into controversial territory here, but
Hmm.
talking about the interference campaign, the influence campaign around the 2016 elections.
Hmm.
That was kind of like the oh crap moment where,
Hmm.
from what I was doing at the time, and this is when I was working at the Department of Energy in the US, that we were seeing things well in advance and alongside the public reporting, or well, again, well in advance of the public reporting. Like, this is real. This is
Hmm.
going on right now.
Hmm.
And what do we do about this as we start identifying not just like, hey, a breach happened, but a breach happened, and here are things that tie this into what that adversary wants to do or seems to want to do afterwards. And so
Hmm.
that was really like the aha moment where it's like, man, we've got data, we've got info in front of us. Are we actioning it appropriately to get ahead of, and quite frankly, just to piss off the adversaries, make their lives more difficult? And it wasn't too long after that that I left government for the private sector, thinking that it's like, okay, like, unchained, I can do what I want now, right? But the idea being is like, all right, let's try to take this idea, looking at things like network infrastructure creation, looking at things like identifying malware samples and repositories, and playing that forward into not just like, hey, I found something bad, but I found something that links to something bigger, something
Hmm.
that seems like it's much more important than just like bad guy trying to do bad thing. And so that was really the moment where it at least became clear to me, it's like there's something going on here and we need to really dig into that a bit more.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super cool. I think it's super intriguing, and that like segues into the next thing, right? Like CTI fundamentals, like for folks that maybe are pen testers today, and maybe this conversation today might pique their interest in CTI. Like we talked about this off air, right? Like from a and you said something really interesting, like there's no school and there was no schoolie, but now, in 2026, we have, from the pen testing perspective, so many different certifications, so many different trainings, and you can even set up your own labs at home to learn these offensive security or these adversary tactics.
Yep.
How do you define like cyber threat intel in in simple terms for those folks that want to get into it, and how can they learn it? You know?
Yeah. And that's a tough one because maybe not to the degree as pen testing, but there's certs, there's classes, there's all sorts of. I have a class,
Yep.
so like I'm part of this as well. There's a variety of resources, paid and free, that you could look to like, I want to learn CTI,
Mhm.
but before even getting into that, I think it's going back to what I said earlier. End of the day, all cyber threat intelligence is about making someone else make a better decision when they need to make one, whether
Mhm.
that's SOC analyst triaging an alert, pen tester coming up with a red team plan or something along those lines for adversary emulation or similar,
Mhm.
or a detection engineer, what they need to work on for detection content within the environment. That the key thought is, end of the day, how does what I'm doing make security at my organization better? Because
Mhm.
it's really easy in CTI, and it's not a terrible thing, it's cool stuff, but it's really easy to fall into the trap of like, hey, I'm going to dig into this esoteric threat that does some cool stuff but relates to dissidents in a country you couldn't spell. And like, I'm sure that's an important thing for some people, but end of the day, it's about like, how does my environment defend itself against the bad guys, so to speak?
Mhm.
And looking for those opportunities to grow that to other areas, great. But ground truth is like, if I'm not doing stuff that's going to ensure that, hey, company XYZ, government agency, ABC, whatever, whoever at the end of the day signs my paychecks is in a
Hmm.
better spot for having me be there. What am I doing?
Exactly. Totally. Totally. Yeah. And just like a follow up there, like, I guess, can you like give like a real example of like, for example, CTI and then like preventing an IR or an incident before it actually happens? Like how can like what's a real example of that? I'm just curious because
Yeah.
I know from the adversary like what we try to do to bypass your stuff, but like how do you guys? And I'm not trying to like get into your head and like, oh, this is what we need to do to bypass. But yeah,
No,
just curious.
it's an excellent question because there's an element of CTI, and I bring this up in my teaching. I bring this up in presentations. I bring this up in conversation all the time.
Hmm.
Um, so Alice in Wonderland, chasing the Red Queen, that you can
Hmm.
always get half again as close, but you never quite catch up to the
Yep.
Red Queen. And it seems like that's how we're operating in CTI, is that we need to see something of the adversary in order to understand what the adversary is doing. And so
Hmm.
we're always trapped in this position where we're kind of responding to events as they've already occurred without the ability, or at least the easy ability, of getting ahead of those events. So what
Hmm.
do? Well, there are ways of looking at CTI that I don't think are as well appreciated among the CTI community more generally, but honestly, maybe resonate pretty well with the pen testing community, vulnerability management community, and similar, where it's about not just understanding what APT99 or whatever is doing right now, or what they did 3 months ago, but rather thinking like, hey, what does the state of the now look like in terms of offensive operations?
Hmm.
Whether it's what the pen testers are doing, what is it that we're seeing in terms of ransomware up pre-ransomware operations, and similar, and then trying to take that information, even if it's absent the ability of understanding who is responsible for that, but being able to determine how our adversaries actually doing things right now. And that includes things like, what sort of frameworks are being used? Is everyone still using Cobalt Strike, or are we seeing Brute Ratal, or Cerberus OS came up as being an issue that I was just looking at the other day because it came up in some dark web chatter and similar, or
Hmm.
vulnerabilities, like what's the state of the now there? Are we talking about remote code execution against VPN concentrators? Are we talking about data leaks against some sort of MFT applications? Understanding what these trends are, while you still can't necessarily get ahead of events in all cases, you can at least start understanding where do things reside now, so that I can better position my organization to understand what it is they need to do to understand, like, hey, yeah, Sandworm or Volt Typhoon, or pick another goofy name out of your hat. This is
Hmm.
what they were doing 6 months ago. That's great. But here's what's going on in the overall offensive space right now. Can't tell you who's doing it necessarily or
Hmm.
why, but this is what you need to learn. And if we're talking about a really tactical perspective on
Hmm.
threat intel, that's where we need to live. Not on the whole telling the story bit of who, why, and similar, but just how are folks doing stuff, and what do we do about that? How do we counter that? How do we detect it? How do we see it? And how do we address attack surface in order to minimize that?
Yeah, and that's definitely some. So I guess like following up with that now, like so as a CTI expert, what like mistakes do you see like actually like companies making? For an example, they get compromised today, like the first 24 hours, I would say 48, but the first 24 hours, what is like the biggest mistakes that companies make before, you know, before anything else?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So, in all honesty, I haven't worked in the IR space in a bit, so I'm a little dated in my knowledge. But at the same
Oh,
time, I don't think it's changed that much, though, either, because it's always about scoping the depth and breadth of an intrusion. Like, oh, I got popped.
mhm,
Cool. Where'd it come from? Where'd it go? What is the map look like related to the one host where I got an alert, or the one area of the network where I saw something come up?
mhm,
And thinking about that, being able to then follow the thread, certainly from a initial investigation perspective, the SOC has their job to do. If that escalates into an incident, the IR team has their job to do. In the background supporting that should be CTI saying, like, oh, you saw this. well, guess what? That thing over there, that thing, that relates to this other thing over here that you might want to look for. Or
Hmm.
here are the likely or potential post actions from that
Hmm.
first observation. And here are the pre actions that we should probably try to validate to make sure that we're looking at the right thing.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, and just like I put in my note, like, so like going back to like get more of the educational aspect.
Mhm.
So like for me, for an example, yeah, I'm a pen tester. Yeah, I love to do this stuff. But if I want to dabble in this, like what are some tools or what are some resources for me and the audience watching today? How can they get more hands on this stuff?
That's a fascinating question because the answer is it depends. There's a lot of ways of taking CTI and running with it. There are some ways where it's like, okay, go pick up a book on Iran or China or Russia or whatever and learn about what they do, what their interests are, what threat actors are associated with those countries and how they operate. That's a pretty high strategic level of looking at things, which is cool, but I honestly think is less valuable. And this is where I start butting heads with people in industry because there is a discussion of like, do you need to be technical to do CTI? And some folks, for good reasons, say like, no, you don't have to be. Like, you can come from any background. Like, yeah, you can come from any background, but end of the day, we're talking about the defense and monitoring of computer network systems. If you're not rogering up to understand what that means, you're going to be lost.
Hmm.
So, from that perspective, there is a big, mushy strategic perspective of CTI that you can take. Great for some places. Some companies provide reporting on this. People pay a lot of money for it. That's awesome. If you're really looking to make a difference in the day to day, though, CTI really needs to move into a more tactical realm where it's not just about understanding, like, oh, the Chinese 5 year plan is this, or here's US intentions in invading Venezuela. Like, okay, that's great. Cool story, bro. But end of the day, how does this protect my network? And getting into things like, how does this malware function?
Hmm.
How do I abuse a system? What are the tendencies I'm seeing adversaries leverage in doing things like living off the land binaries and scripts, or
Hmm.
looking at things like proxy networks and similar to mask command and control frameworks,
Hmm.
providing, I'm not saying that CTI folks need to be rock star reverse engineers or network protocol analysts, but if you don't understand what that stuff means at least a pretty good level, you're going to be lost in terms of providing really direct, really meaningful support to the folks that are looking to us, ideally looking to us, to help secure the environment at the end of the day. So, with that in mind, what resources can you look to? CTI is kind of like a bit of everything. So, digging into pen testing courses. Why? Because understanding how adversaries operate, even if they are emulated adversaries, is critical. Understanding operating system fundamentals, understanding things like network communication, network protocols, and infrastructure creation characteristics. All of that are key elements of CTI. Unfortunately, the main ways of accessing that, outside of certain things that are hands-on, like, you know uh, blue team exercises, CTFs, pen testing courses, and similar, looking at good reporting within the field, reading it and understanding it, seeing what others have done before and learning from it.
Fair. Yeah, man. That's super informative. And that's what I thought. Like it's not really like it's a melting pot, right?
Yeah.
Some IR, some SOC, some pen testing, some network engineer, like you said, network protocols, understanding Wireshark, taking apart something because you have to understand where communications are going, what is a SYNAC request, and all these other things. Like you touch on some good stuff that I think, because even in the pen testing side of things, like, I'm sure like you get a million questions, as well. Like at least I do. I get like, oh, I'm working at Giuseppe's Pizza Paula today, and I want to be a pen tester tomorrow. It's like, man, that's not really, you jumping the gun here. At the end of the day, you have to understand the preliminary stuff prior, and a lot of people, are impatient or whatever. So, they try to do shortcuts or whatnot. So yeah, that's really really cool. So, I think I know the answer, but like, how would like, oh, how can I say this? Like, I think you touched on it, but like, how should like CTI, like, or how do you guys like interact with like the SOC and the IR teams? Like where do you guys come into play with that? Because you touched on some stuff like, okay, like the SOC analysts get an alert, then they, escalate it to IR, and then IR escalates it to CTI. But like, is that how you folks integrate with those teams?
That's
Or
definitely one operational way of looking at it, but
Mhm,
ideally, and to one of the things that I teach is that there are pre-event and post-event perspectives to how threat intelligence can interact with security operations, whether we're talking SOC, IR, detection engineering, threat hunting, and similar disciplines. That from a pre-event perspective, there is how do I understand, how do I better know what's going on in threat space?
mhm,
What are the trends? What are the tendencies? What are the emerging things that are going on there to inform how I act on the day-to-day basis? And then from a post-event perspective, there is, what does this mean? How did this align with the bigger picture of what's going on? Who tried to breach us? How does that relate to the broader ecosystem of threat actors and similar? And how you do this is going to really depend upon the size, nature, and resources available to the organization in question. This could be either super informal because CTI is your SOC shift lead, or one of your IR guys or persons when they're not doing an IR, or you could be a very large organization that has very specialized teams that has an actual CTI team.
mhm.
So is it a Slack channel, Teams channel? Oh, I hope it's not a Teams channel. Just joking. But anyway, some sort of real-time communication channel to allow for collaboration and such.
Yeah.
Is it making sure you're sending like a daily summary email? End of the day, it's what works for you and your org. But the main
Mhm.
thing as part of this entire process is ensuring continuous, meaningful communication, and that folks aren't strangers. Because that's the thing that really breaks apart these sorts of items when CTI is busy sending reports up to CISO and crap like that of
Mhm.
saying like, oh, the Russians are coming after us or the Chinese are coming after us or whatever, while the SOC is like, you guys aren't doing anything for us. Who are you? And then out of the blue, CTI says like, you need to block this IP. It's like, who the hell are you? Why are you telling me to do this now? Like,
Yeah.
give a crap or whatever what you're saying.
Yeah.
Building that familiarity, that trust, as well as the understanding of what the organization is trying to do and what they can achieve, I think is key for CTI to be successful when embedding within and supporting those security operations functions.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's really cool. So like another like thing like in the real world, like do you guys have to I know like because I've done and I still sometimes do some blue teaming stuff like on the side, and I help friends like with Microsoft stuff. I know you said we laughed at Teams, like Microsoft Sentinel, MDE,
Mhm.
CrowdStrike, all the bells and whistles. So does like the CTI world like deal with like alert fatigue, and how can you reduce that? Like how do you guys deal with that in that world?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of data coming across a variety of channels, whether you're looking purely at internal telemetry, like what alerts am I getting in the SIM or in the, whatever your alert queue is or the SOAR instance or whatever, to there are so many damn InfoSec companies out there these days that are publishing blogs on stuff. Good luck trying to keep up with all that crap.
Yeah.
That's what LLMs are for, right?
Yeah.
Don't quote me on that one. But but no, at the end of the day, it's like there's so much info. How do I actually distill that down into the things that I just simply need? And
Hmm.
that's a critical element. So it's maybe a little different from alert fatigue, like you would see in a SOC, but it's not that far off in terms of like, how do I juggle all these different things that are coming into me, coming into my workstation, in my email queue, my Slack alerts, my social media alerts, and such? And how do I focus on just what's important?
Hmm.
And it's really hard. And it's a combination of sort of personal discipline, like
Hmm.
knowing your own limits and knowing what you can do, and then understanding the needs of your own organization. So there's an entire discipline of something called intelligence requirements that you can dig into. Folks like Andrei Rodchik and similar have written articles and given presentations on this, which are pretty good. But to like just narrow it down to what matters, it's like at the end of the day, what's my customer need? Just like if
Mhm.
I'm thinking from a pen testing perspective, it's not like I'm not getting paid to generate the most esoteric, amazing custom exploit or whatever on my client. Like, no, my client needs to know where they're weak and where they need to improve their defenses.
Exactly.
So if I'm doing cheat codes, like that doesn't help them at all. But if I'm doing something that actually allows them to make a meaningful action, well, that's important. So the same applies for CTI. Yeah, looking at the latest and greatest research on People's Republic of China test ranges for power grid disruption capabilities.
Mhm.
Cool story. I work for a bank. Who the hell cares? So
Yeah.
focus on what matters, focus on what your organization needs, and that allows you to start then filtering what I need to care about from like, hey, that's really interesting and cool. Maybe I read about it in my off hours because I don't have hobbies like me. And you take it from there.
Yeah. And that's good stuff. And like I don't know if we touched on this, excuse me if my ADD is kicking in, but like now, how do we get into this? Like how like if someone wants to get into the field or get into CTI specifically, like how can we do that? I don't know if I
Man,
asked that question. If I did, I'm sorry, but
we've kind of danced around it, but haven't addressed it because honestly, it's a tough one because I don't really know. I got into this field in kind of a roundabout way. Full disclosure on my background. I went to school. I was a philosophy major at university, realized that was a stupid idea and joined the military. And then when I joined the military thinking I'd see the world, they said like, "Oh, you've done some computer stuff. We're going to put you over here." And here I am today. Is that
gotcha.
a sustainable, repeatable way of getting into the field? Probably not. So, but I've met people who have gotten into CTI who have taken like the security progression path, like they started off in the SOC or help desk and moved up through there. I've met people who have come right out of school and have been very successful in becoming CTI analysts. And I don't like it frustrates me because it's really crap advice for people who are trying to break in to say like, oh, there's lots of different ways to do this. It's like I don't need lots of ways. I need like the way. Tell
Yeah,
me what the way
exactly.
is. But
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, and this is why what I said earlier about like is CTI a technical field? Like you bet your ass it is. If you don't think
Mhm.
it is, you're going to be sorry down the line unless you end up in a very unique situation. Is that if you really want to do CTI, you need to understand how intrusions work, and I would argue that means both from the blue and the red perspective. My computer experience before I started doing CTI was offensive security and then incident response. So
Okay.
that's kind of where I came from for here, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything else in the world because I think it gave me a really great understanding of not just what adversaries do or what adversaries need to do, but also how do you respond to those adversaries and what I need to know to respond to those adversaries. So that's one element is like what just simply matters. But then there also needs to be a curiosity to step back and ask the bigger questions about like, okay, this was incident A. What does that incident teach me? What do I learn from that? How does this relate to the bigger picture?
Mhm.
So it's being able to both dig into the weeds a bit to figure out what are the details, but then being able to take a step back and then take those details and figure out how does this tie into a bigger picture that I can communicate to the folks that are looking at to me to help support their security program.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And just like, pen testing, everyone's like, or whatever. When I was a network engineer, when I was a system engineer, it's like, even like I said, like they want to skip the steps for even getting into offensive security. I always say, yeah, there's like I think Joe, like the mayor, he worked at TCM, now he's somewhere else. Like he was, I don't know, cleaning pools or something like that, or
No.
and then he got into offensive security. Like he's a unicorn. Like and I don't know many people that just were working at, like I said, Giuseppe's Pizza Parlor yesterday and then got
Mhm.
into a pen testing role. Um, so I always say like, go through the trenches, understand the fundamentals, understand operating system, build out.
Yep.
And even like before you go into hack the box and try hack me's and blah blah blah, I always say like build your own stuff at home, because now when I say okay, you have open VPN and then VPN into one of their networks, what is Diffie-Hellman? Like what is actually happening between those key exchanges when you're connecting to a VPN? And a
Yep.
lot of people are like, oh, I just I don't know. I just put OpenVPN and it's like, so backing up and taking a step back, because now how can you decipher if there's a VPN issue, or if there's something like the nitty gritty, going back to network protocol analyzers like Wireshark
Yep.
and stuff like that. So I
Slinging some
always,
packets and digging in and really
exactly,
getting into the material. Can I tell a
exactly.
funny story for a second?
Yeah, go for it, dude.
So I think it was the first RSA conference after COVID, and I was sitting on a bench in the park behind the Moscone Center, just like trying to detox from the vendor floor and all the crazy crap that happens at that event. So for
Mhm.
folks in our audience who aren't familiar, the RSA conference is a huge vendor event for information security in San Francisco every year. And I'm sitting on this bench and I overhear a couple people talking about 10, 15 feet away from me. And one of them says like, so what does RSA stand for? I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. And the other dude, like, no kidding, says like, it's a made up word. They just use that in order to name the company or whatever. It's like, oh my God, that's the initials of the guys who developed the encryption protocols for the internet. Like, what are you talking about? And like, that's an extreme example, but it really shows where it's like, end of the day, like, know your stuff, know your history, know where this is coming from, whether it's like you're saying, like, what's an SSH or handshake look like, what's SSL TLS look like,
Yep.
how does HTTPS work? It might seem like, well, why do I need to know that? I'm going to be popping shells or researching what some goofy name entity or whatever is doing against mobile devices. Like, end of the day, you need to know that, because when you start getting into that sort of stuff, you're going to look like an idiot if you start talking about things you don't understand what it is you're saying, or what the implications are of the things that you're looking at.
Yeah, and if we're storytelling, story time. So like there was, when I was a system engineer, um, I don't like calling people out on their weaknesses, because I know interviews can be super, super stressful.
Yep.
I've been stuck on interviews like with a simple question like, "Oh, what does responder do?" And I'm like, "Oh shit, like what?"
Yep.
Like it's a given, right? But I remember, and I try to make my interviews when I was interviewing super, super relaxed, chill, like, "Yo, what do you do for for fun?" And just like, I'm not gonna be like, "Oh, how do you get DA within your first day?" Like that's not gonna be my initial question. But
Fishing
there
for
is
minute.
companies out there, I will not mention them. I've been on interviews like, "Okay, Pat, all right, so tell me how you get DA in a network environment." Dude, like I've gotten DA in 30 seconds, and it took me 8 days to get DA. So, so yeah, so I got into this interview, and I was like, "Hey man, like, the traditional like, "Hey, how's it going? How was your drive in?" This is when we had to like actually go into an office. So this was about 15 years ago. And he just got his no, his MCITP, which is Microsoft Certified IT Professional for Enterprise Admin. So if those folks don't know what that is, that's when you pass your 2008 R2. It's like you're the master of of Windows Server infrastructure, and it's like the old school MCSEs. And and he's like, he's just got his MTITP, and I'm like, okay, cool, like this is awesome. And those folks that don't know, this is you can go to Exam Cram and study these in brain dumps back then. And I did it for my MCSE. For one of the exams, I had a brain dump because I only had so much time and I needed to get it. But anyhow, like I'm not saying I never did that because I'll be lying. So so this kid got his MCITP, and I was like, "Oh, awesome, man!" Like, so it's just a very, very basic question about AD. Like now I'm pen testing AD, but back then I used to build AD. And I told them, I was like, "Hey, like, there's two basic questions. If a user gets logs into the system tomorrow, and it says, you know, no log on server available, what does that mean, right?" And that's a super basic, that's a help desk thing, right?
Yep.
It's DNS. So it's like, and then the second one, and he was just giving me like one thing of advice, guys, like never give a ring around the rosy answer. If you don't know, just say, I don't know, you know? And
Yep.
I've done it a million times. Like there was things like in web app questions, I'm like, fuck, I don't know. I have no idea. Right. Um, just like someone asked me the other day about if I know how to compromise and do OT and SCADA. And I was like, no, my firm doesn't do that. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, give me one day and go try to find someone that I don't really know, and then say we can do this. And I'm very honest with my abilities.
Yep.
But so this kid was like, "Oh yeah, yeah," give me a ring around the rosy. I'm like, "Okay, cool. I'm not gonna call you out on it, but okay, wrong." And then the second question was, you have two domain controllers, and DC, your PDC, your primary domain controller, goes down. How do you automate the FSMO roles to go over to your PDC, or go from your PDC over to your secondary?
Yep.
And he didn't know what anything was like DC sync, or he didn't know what rep admin was to replicate your replicate sites and services. So it's like the moral of this whole story is like, be honest, and
Yep.
like what you put on your resume, and please know that, because
Yep.
you're gonna get called out on it. And that's why, like, and if you don't know, like I said, like 95% of the commands I use are in my Notion. I don't remember every single one, right?
Yep.
That's just the God honest truth. If you say you do, you're fucking lying.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's just something I wanted to touch on with the whole storytelling. I'm like, man, there's so many fun other stories, but yeah, that was one of them that always sticks out. And so like, speaking about storytelling, like was there like ever a point where, even on pen testing or in your career, where you like had a oh shit moment, like, oh man, this didn't go good?
Yeah, I had one of those. I can't get into too many details on it, given
Yeah.
where I was at the time. But
No, you don't have to
yeah,
disclose where
no, it's all
just like
good.
the incident.
But like, end of the day, shit happens,
Yep.
and like you look at a PCAP when you get an alert, and it's like, oh, looks like it failed.
Hmm.
Close. Didn't happen. Come back a week later, see the same activity, and realize that, oh shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's.
I've done one of those. That was a while ago, but it was very much a learning moment. Thankfully, it wasn't a resume generating moment, because I worked in an organization that realized that, like, hey, mistakes happen. None of us are perfect. As long as
Hmm.
we're continuing to look at this defense in depth and similar things.
Hmm.
But, these things do happen at the end of the day. And that's why, whether it's a threat analysis, threat projection, like, okay, I'm starting to like look to things in the future or that have not happened yet based on evidence prior,
Hmm.
my cone of uncertainty starts getting significantly wider the further out I project. Of course,
Hmm.
you're going to make mistakes, but even at the SOC level or the pen test level, it's like, oh, great. Like you were talking about the OT example earlier. So I worked at Dragos for several years in the OT space, and I've done stuff in government around that as well. And it's like, oh, like great. I've got a host or whatever inside the OT network. Let me just do a ping scan or whatever and see what happens. And then realize that you just killed a box because it was running a custom TCP IP stack or whatever and didn't process it properly, which
Yep.
sounds hilarious and silly, but does happen. And it's
Yep.
like, oh shit, what do I do now? Um,
That's a good oh shit moment.
Especially when you start talking about cyber physical or whatever, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, what did I just take out?
Exactly.
Um, so yeah, like understanding that these things happen. Yeah, it goes back to kind of like your ring around the rosy answer, and in an
Hmm.
interview, being able to own up to it's like, I just don't know that,
Hmm.
or being able to own up, it's like, yeah, I didn't get that right.
Yep.
Here's where I can go from there. That there needs to be a degree of honesty and transparency, because otherwise you're leaving the person behind you, the person after you, in a position where they're dealing with crap info to try to then fix, respond, or otherwise mitigate what you may have missed. Which
Yep.
again, everyone screws up. I've screwed up. Pat, I'm sure
Yep.
you're perfect. I can't imagine you've ever screwed up. But
I messed up a lot.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. Like these things happen because we're human,
yeah.
and it's through things like documentation, being able
Hmm.
to go back and realize that, oh, this is what I missed, and here's why I missed it. This is how I can start fixing this. Communication, letting folks know in an honest, transparent way what happened, and then grit, being able to then suck it up, say like, "Yep, I screwed up. I'll wear the hair shirt for a bit, and I'm going to work to fix it now. Hopefully, I don't get fired. That shouldn't be the consequence unless it's something especially egregious. But generally speaking, again, where humans, like even the machines, like look at what you get out of an LLM output. If you ask it to write a Yara signature or come up with the pen test planning, you actually review it line
Yep.
by line. It's like, nope, not trusting them anytime either. So
Yeah.
everyone makes mistakes.
Yep.
And just understanding that and owning up to it is key in being able to work in this field.
Yeah, and speaking about LLMs and everything like that, that was something I wanted to touch on. Like, how do you think like AI has changed like the attacker, like like craft, like how they craft exploits and all that good stuff. Like, do you feel like it has any impact or
I think
better or
it does
worse?
have impact. I think the primary impact, though, isn't so much on quality or scope, but it's on velocity, if that
Mm.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not so much that the AI, every large language model is a prediction engine based upon the inputs that have been fed to it previously. So the ability of an LLM to come up with something completely novel, new, or interesting, very small.
Yeah.
Instead, it's going to be able to come up with like, hey, I've read these 15 other things or whatever. This might apply to you. So it really accelerates the ability of humans to be able to process and learn from what's come before. So
Mm.
when I think of LLMs and their contributions to offensive security and what defenders need to be worried about with them is that it boosts the timeline that we're operating on. Take pick a vulnerability. We're on CVE 2026, whatever right now.
Mm-hmm.
That we'll pick on a common offender. There's a new Fortinet vulnerability in FortiOS or something. Big
Mm-hmm.
surprise. Okay, 3 years ago, it may have taken a couple days, maybe even a couple of weeks for someone to reverse engineer the patch, come up with the exploit payload or something based off of that. If there wasn't exploit payload already, because someone had just done bug hunting for it, like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, that's bad, but it gives us some time to apply the patch, take mitigating actions, etc.
Mm-hmm.
These days, I think we're in a spot where the results may not always be great or accurate. There's some interesting research around this in terms of things like AI exploit outputs and similar, but in accelerating the time frame in which that research takes place, what used to take a couple of weeks may not take a couple of days, may not take a couple of hours, just to
Mm-hmm.
even do things like diff a patch from something else or whatever, or to identify like, hey, what changed between these two items?
Mm-hmm.
Grok, Gemini, Claude, tell me. Really accelerates the speed of doing things because like fuzzers have been around forever.
Yeah.
So fundamental bug hunting that doesn't change, but being able to weaponize released information very quickly, I think that has changed, and that's where we're going to really see AI step in the immediate term in changing the landscape for offensive security and being able to develop and push out capabilities
Mm-hmm.
and impact the time frames that defenders need to respond to in order to mitigate or patch or advocate for other measures to counteract those items.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And I think Jason Havoc's had some stuff with some AI stuff that he's always, you know, developing something and going after stuff. So he's definitely an awesome resource for like the AI pen testing and all that good stuff. So it's like what's how much time we have? Like 15 minutes. So about 5 more minutes, and then we'll look at the Q&A. So like out of like all the industries, you think like what industries you think are like targeted the hardest? Curious to see what you think. Hospitals, like, do you think like
Depends on
medical?
who's doing the targeting. If you're talking like just e-crime, ransomware, I want to make money. These days, it almost seems indiscriminate. I published a blog through Dataminer before the holidays about how ransomware operations have changed from like, oh, I'm going to lock your network up or whatever. I'm going to breach your network. I'm going to go interactive, get domain admin, and I'm going to push out a locker to your entire environment and hold you for ransom.
Hmm.
That takes work. I got to
Yeah.
like actually do that. Like, okay, maybe the case depending on how lucky you are or how bad that network setup, that I can get DA in a day or maybe an hour or so. But generally speaking, I have to spend time on keyboard in order to make that happen. What we're seeing now, I think, the e-crime space is like, why do I bother with that when I can just like pop your MFT instance because there's a leak vulnerability or something into it, pull all this data that you didn't want public or whatever, hold it, say like, I'll publish it unless you pay me.
Hmm.
And that's easy. Even if I don't get a whole lot of people paying me, the amount of effort required to actually make that happen is pretty small.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
just looking at the efficiency standpoint on the e-crime side, I think like, okay, it's probably getting a little like wherever I can make things pay off the quickest.
Hmm.
On your state sponsored side, I'm getting worried these days that folks are getting more interested in getting more willing to act in cyber physical spaces, talking
Hmm.
about your OT, your SCADA, your similar sorts of environments,
Hmm.
because you've got folks that are aiming for actual disruptive or the pre-positioning or the preliminary work for disruption. And that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Not so much hospitals, but definitely things like electric, oil and gas, transportation, similar. And that starts hitting at things where it's like, okay, bank or whoever gets breached again, like I get another 12 months of identity theft protection for free. Great. This happens all the time. Something happens or whatever where it's like, oh, I lost electricity for a week. That's going to be really, really
Yeah.
bad. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, for sure. So that's definitely true. So like I have a few more things I wanted to ask, but like for as a pen testing firm that we offer to SMBs, um, if you had to warn like an SMB about one thing right now, what would it be?
external facing assets. End of the
Mm,
day, like so I worked at Huntress for a bit, and certainly working in the SMB space, and whether it's holding your MSP to your MSP's feet to the fire, or just having an understanding of what you're deploying yourself to enable people to work from home, work remotely, or whatever. But that external footprint of like, what am I exposing that lets others touch my network is key, because look at the M-Trends report, the Verizon DBIR. What are the top methods for initial access these days? It's not phishing anymore. It's a combination of browser-based and server-based exploit activity.
mhm.
So it's really looking for like, how do I like actually like reach out and touch you, as opposed to looking for that social engineering, human engineering aspect of things. Like things have really shifted in that regard. So for an SMB, what am I exposing to the world, and how do I make sure that I'm exposing only as little as I need to, and what little that I am is locked down or reasonably secure so that it's not a liability for me.
Yeah, and speaking about like you mentioned something really interesting, and I was doing more research before the holidays about like browser hijacking, and that's pretty much session takeovers. Yes, guys, I do know about that stuff. I just don't talk about it. But you ever heard of a company called SquareX, like the browser-based like security?
No, I have not.
Um, it's pretty interesting. And I tested it, and it's pretty cool. So if anyone's looking to understand, and I'm glad that this conversation came up because I think it's super important. Because yeah, phishing is still all good in the hood,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, like there's so many more uh, like better attacks and more successful ones, right?
Yeah. Well, and even just looking at the entire ecosystem of things like info stealers, for
Yep.
example, which ties back into external assets, where it's like, okay, I infect you at Redline. Great. I steal your single factor VPN authentication. Okay. Now your employer is screwed
Mhm.
because of how that works.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I posted it in our private chat. Sorry.
No, it's all good.
So if those folks that want to see when I'm talking about SquareX, and you guys can look at that, you can look at the use cases. It helps for data loss prevention. It's a really cool tool, so you guys can check it out. And just in case, like someone wants to look at it, I threw it in the link in the comments. And so yeah, we have about 10 minutes. So we'll look at some, if there's any questions in here. And then the last 5 minutes, I want to do something fun that I want to start is like rapid fire questions, fun
Okay.
little ending. Um, Let me see if there's any. Now I'm actually gonna look because I used to like look at the comments while I'm speaking. Then like my ADD, I won't be paying attention to what you're saying. I'm trying to focus on here.
I hear
So
you.
out of respect, that's something I always do. I just focus on you, and then do the questions and or the comments and stuff like that later. So let's now I want to go ahead and check this out and see if there's. All right, so we have Jose. If Jose is still here, like how do I get into DFIR? And
Man, that's a tough one. I mean, we kind of talked about CTI specifically, but DFIR these days, like it's both lots of possibilities, but also it's more difficult than it used to be.
Hmm.
I don't know for folks, either yourself or for people who are listening online who are familiar with Leslie Carhart, but they've done like resume workshops and employment help for a while. And, Leslie's been awesome in the field in DFIR for many years at this point. And even they've noticed that it's getting harder to break into this field at this point,
Mm.
for a variety of reasons, which really sucks.
Hmm.
So in trying to get into DFIR or similar, it's not just like, hey, I took a couple of certs, I got my Sec Plus, Net Plus, and whatever, or even I took a SANS class, like I'm golden, right? Like, no, it doesn't work that way anymore.
Yeah.
So I would argue it's a combination of both having that foundational knowledge that comes through those programs, even if you don't necessarily have the cert, and then being able to just get a role or an advocate or mentor within organizations that can vouch for you, because it's just not, 5 years ago, pre-COVID or whatever, like, okay, security jobs, like, oh, cyber, great, here, like, come on in, work remote from
Yeah.
your basement or whatever, like, good times. It ain't that way anymore,
Yeah.
unfortunately, and people got to work a little harder, both to get out of the death trap of sending resumes into the void, and then
Hmm.
even finding those roles to begin with. So it's not impossible. I'm not trying to be a complete Debbie Downer here, but
Yeah.
it does take a little bit more work than it did a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and it's true. And one thing I can just touch on it, like, getting into any field, right? Like getting into any field, you have to showcase your work. So if DFIR or forensics or computer forensics, what is InCase? What is autopsy? What are these kind of tools? Like I did the CHFI from EC Council, that's Certified Hacking Forensics Investigator, and
Yep.
I really loved that. You know what I mean? Like for a year and a half, I was going, oh, maybe 2 years. Like I was working with a local IT MSP company in South Florida,
Mhm.
and I would go to court, chain of custody. And this, I had my white gloves on and taking apart platters on the drive, and it was super, super fun. But
Yep.
obviously, times have changed. Like Joe said, like it's not as, I don't want to say it's not as easy, but it's not as easy as it was 10 years ago. Because everyone's like fighting for the same position. That's why, how do you stand out? You have to start showcasing. And I said that like in one of my videos I just made, like, how to get a job the real way. Because folks I mentor and everything, it's like, I'm applying everywhere. And then I'm like, yeah, but who the hell is Joe Smith? Right? Like,
Yeah.
I know Joe Smith, but no one else knows you. So I know you like to stay anonymous, dude, but if you really want a job out there, you're gonna have to showcase stuff, not only on my little Discord server, you have to show the world.
Yep.
And the world is small. I mean, the world is big, but the community is small, right? So
Agreed.
yeah. So let's see. What's up? Hey, what's up, Paul? Good to see you, Matthew, Kathy. Oh, awesome. Glenn, FedEx, always showing up. Much love, guys. Another day of blah. I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions. Um, getting aware of his net asset, then of course, okay, that's not really a question. Do, 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 do. Usually financial gets targeted for money. Yeah, financial firms. The CISSP, I'm jealous. Question, or let's Q&A question. Let's see, Ravi. Hi, Joe Packin. Starlink. Can Starlink be hacked, especially a plan or leverage on Wi-Fi in space?
I mean, it's a computer. At the end of the day, it can be hacked. The
Mm-hmm.
likelihood of it being hacked, I'm not 100% certain. Um, I always look to these sorts of examples, like whether it's Starlink or similar, is that, like, yes, it's a network system. If you're able to touch it, you could do something to it. However,
Mm-hmm.
are you able to touch it? And thinking about things in that perspective, I actually did some research and analysis, not Starlink, but for Viasat, when their network was compromised and taken down in Ukraine a few years ago, and what that event looked like for the KSAT activity. And being able to swim upstream to do things like deliver commands to listening items is difficult given the architecture of how these networks work. being able to get into these networks, whether it is at the control station level, the back office level, or similar, and to execute things that could lead to things like denial of service conditions. Not trivial, but more capable. So it
Hmm.
really depends on like what is it that I'm trying to achieve and what is my ability to do so. So I would argue that my ability to do something like take over a 777 or Dreamliner or A3, whatever the Airbus long haul flight is or whatever, via a Starlink terminal and fly the plane, that's probably not happening anytime soon. Being able to impact the ability of that asset to communicate with others, whether that's
Hmm.
just the Wi-Fi for, the onboard Wi-Fi for the passengers, or potentially even the communication network for the pilots, that becomes a little bit more reasonable and scary.
Hmm.
So it really just depends on what is it I trying to achieve, and what's the realistic chance that I can achieve that within the scope of what that technology exposes to me.
Hmm. Totally. All right. Last thing before we get into the rapid fire questions. Obviously, we're meeting next month, a couple weeks now at Intellicon,
Yep.
right? So, I'm going to be keynoting. I'm super honored. I'm going to be like speaking on, about my life, growing up the way I grew up. So, if you guys are in the Austin, Texas next month, I guess,
February 5th, I think.
Intellicon and you know, Joe, you will be there. What will you be doing there for the folks that that
Yes.
are
So
interested?
I'm going to give a full day version of my threat intelligence plus detection engineering and threat hunting workshop. So I teach this online a couple times a year, but in person is much better than online. So really hoping to get some folks in the room for that, and to, just, hey, let's talk how threat intel actually can be where rubber meets the road and improve security outcomes.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah. So if anyone is listening, please sign up. It's on my LinkedIn. I will put it in the comments below once I'm done. So yeah. So let's get this because we have 4 minutes. Some rapid fire questions for the end. I appreciate everyone coming tonight, and hopefully everyone had a wonderful New Year, Christmas, and they're kicking butt the start of 2026. So all right, first question: CTI or incident response?
Like what I want to do.
Yeah,
CTI, incident response, is stressful.
true. Logs or network traffic?
Ooh, that's a good one. Network traffic.
Sick. All right. Automation or human analysts?
Human analysts, but ask me again in 3 years.
Fair enough. One tool you couldn't live without?
Ooh. You're going to laugh at me. Excel.
Love it. I fucking suck at Excel. Um, so, coffee or energy drinks for incidents?
Oh, coffee. Energy drinks scare the hell out of me. Coffee all the way.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. And if people want to learn more about you, Joe, follow your work, follow your stuff. you
Yeah.
know, the floor is yours for the next 2 minutes. How can they connect with you? And we'll call it evening.
Yeah. So I have two websites. One is more of a blog, which I'm dropping for you right now.
Okay.
And the other is more trading related. Those are both good places to find me. So pylos.co, where you can hear me opine on the things that are going on. I haven't published in a couple of months at this point because I've been lazy, but it's a good place also to see, I keep it kind of as a writing CV of all the things that I've done. But also, if you're really interested in learning more about threat intel, especially threat intel as it relates to solving actual security problems, Paralus.co, Paralus.co. That's my training company, where I'll be teaching that course at Intellicon in just a little under a month right now,
Yeah.
and similar. So, follow postings there. Reach out, let me know. But also, I've got a lot of resources if you're interested in CTI for IT spaces as well as OT spaces, because I've done a lot of work there too. So feel free to check those resources out. And I'm not hard to find. LinkedIn, social media, email, maybe we'll get through, but who knows? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. I really appreciate you, Joe. I'll see you in a few weeks. I
yeah.
love you all. Thank you